Here is something nobody told you. The first $1,000 you save is the hardest thing you will ever do with money. Not because of discipline, not because of sacrifice, but because nothing happens. You save $1,000 and the world looks exactly the same. The coffee still costs too much. The rent still goes up. Your net worth is technically positive and it feels like a lie. So you push $5,000, $10,000, and somewhere around there, people start talking. They say $15,000 is the emergency fund threshold. They say the first $10,000 is the hardest. Everyone has a number.
But they always skip the one that actually matters, $20,000. That is not just a savings milestone. That is the point where the math of money stops being about what you earn and starts being about what money earns. That is the moment the whole system begins working for you instead of on you. And almost nobody talks about what actually happens there or why. To understand why 20,000 is different, you first have to understand why everything below it is kind of a trap. Not a scam, not a conspiracy, just physics, the physics of small numbers.
When you have $500 saved and you earn 3% interest, you make $15 a year, which is one decent lunch. That number cannot protect you. It cannot grow fast enough to matter. And so your financial life remains entirely dependent on one thing, your next paycheck. This is what economists call income dependency. Your survival, your rent, your ability to absorb a car repair or a medical bill, all of it is chained to your employer, your hours, your body showing up to work. The money you have saved is a rounding error in that equation.
Most people live here their entire lives, not because they are bad with money, but because the gap between where they are and where the math changes is wide, and nobody clearly shows them where that line is. The line is roughly $20,000, and here is why that number is not arbitrary. At $20,000, three things change at the same time, and it is the combination that matters, not any one of them alone.
First, the interest becomes audible. $20,000 at a 5% yield generates $1,000 a year. That is $83 a month. Meaningless? Maybe. But it is now a number you can see. It is no longer rounding error. It is a small but real parallel income stream running in the background while you sleep, while you work, while you do nothing at all. Your money has started a second job. Second, your risk profile quietly shifts.
A $20,000 emergency fund does not just cover 3 to 6 months of expenses for most households. It changes how you negotiate. It changes whether you quit a bad job or stay because you have no cushion. It changes whether you accept a lowball salary offer because you are desperate or whether you walk away. The absence of financial panic is itself a financial advantage. You stop making fear-based decisions, and fear-based decisions are expensive. Third, you cross the threshold of investable capital.
Below a certain amount, the friction costs of investing eat your returns. Brokerage minimums, fund expense ratios, the time cost of managing tiny positions, the tax complexity for negligible gains. These are not prohibitive at $20,000, but they become worth bearing. At $20,000, you can meaningfully diversify. You can access index funds. You can begin building a position that compounds over decades rather than just sitting still.
These three things together create a qualitative shift, not just a quantitative one. You are not just richer by a number. You are operating inside a different financial reality. Now here's where it gets interesting and slightly uncomfortable. Compounding is the most famous concept in personal finance. Everyone has heard the Einstein quote, whether or not Einstein actually said it. Everyone nods along in the financial literacy video, and then almost nobody actually experiences it because almost nobody gets their money to the altitude where it starts doing real work.
Here is the math nobody draws out clearly. $20,000 invested in a broad market index fund, earning the historical average of roughly 7% annually after inflation, doubles in approximately 10 years. So at 30, you have 20,000. At 40, you have 40,000. At 50, you have 80,000. At 60, you are sitting on 160,000 from that one base position without adding a single dollar. That is not exciting. That is not a yacht. But here is the thing. You were almost certainly going to add dollars, and those additions compound too. And if your base was not 20,000 but 40, the final number is not 160, it is 320. The multiplier does not change, the base does. This is why the 20,000 mark is
is not just important, it is disproportionately important. Every dollar that enters the portfolio at this stage has decades of runway. The person who reaches $20,000 at 25 and the person who reaches it at 45 are not playing the same game. They are playing the same rules with radically different outcomes because time is the invisible variable that finance courses mention and Instagram never does.
The uncomfortable part is this. Getting to 20,000 requires real sacrifice for most households. The average American has under $5,000 in savings. In the UK, roughly a third of adults have less than £1,000 set aside. In much of the developing world, the concept of discretionary savings at this scale is almost theoretical. So the system that rewards you most for crossing 20,000 is the same system that makes crossing it very hard. That is not an accident. It is just how capital accumulation works. It always has.
Here is what the internet will tell you. Get to 100,000 first. That is the real inflection point. Jeff Bezos apparently said that. The first 100,000 is the hardest. Hustle, sacrifice, grind, and once you hit that number, the machine takes over. And technically, that is true. $100,000 at 7% generates $7,000 a year. That is real money. That is a meaningful supplement to most salaries. That is a down payment on financial independence.
But the advice skips a step, a large, painful, discouraging step, because for most people, the 100,000 milestone is so distant it feels fictional. And when the goal is fiction, behavior does not change. People do not save toward abstractions. They save toward numbers that feel real and proximate and achievable. 20,000 feels achievable. For someone earning a modest income, saving $500 a month, that is a 3-year goal. Not easy, but imaginable.
And crucially, 20,000 is the number where saving stops feeling futile, where the interest you earn starts being a number rather than a decimal, where you begin to feel for the first time that the machine is slightly on your side. The advice ecosystem overshoots by 5 times and then wonders why nobody is saving. Zoom out for a moment. The reason this matters beyond your personal spreadsheet is that wealth concentration is not just a political talking point. It is a mathematical consequence of how compounding works across a population.
People above the 20,000 threshold accumulate faster. People below it stay dependent on income. Income is capped by hours. Capital is not. Over decades, the gap between these two populations does not close. It expands. Not because the wealthy are smarter or more disciplined, but because they reached the altitude where the mechanics favor them, and then the mechanics kept favoring them. This is why inherited wealth is so structurally powerful. It is not just money. It is a head start past the hard part. The generation that inherits $50,000 does not have to spend a decade grinding to the threshold. They start above it. They get the compounding years that the first generation spent climbing.
And the generation that inherits nothing starts at zero, often at negative with student debt. They spend their peak earning years reaching a threshold that someone else crossed before they were born. The 20,000 line is not just personal. It is the invisible border between two financial ecosystems with different rules. So what do you do with this? That is the part where most videos hand you a list. Automate your savings, cut your expenses, open a high-yield account. And those things are true. They are useful. They are not wrong.
But the more honest answer is that knowing the threshold matters before knowing the tactics, because tactics without a target are just activity, and most financial content gives you activity, because activity feels productive and thresholds feel daunting. $20,000. That is where the physics changes. That is where interest becomes real, where fear loses its grip on your decisions, where compounding has enough material to work with. Below it, you are surviving. Above it, you are participating in a different game.
The question nobody can answer for you is this. If the system is designed to reward people who are already past the hard part and punish people who are still climbing toward it, is the advice to just climb faster actually useful? Or is it the financial equivalent of telling someone stuck in traffic to drive faster? I do not have a clean answer to that, but I think it is worth sitting with, because the discomfort of that question is probably more valuable than the comfort of a 5-step savings plan. Think about it.